Summer of the Mariposas, Chapter 5. El Mundo, the world. The world could be standing still, and we'd all be just as dizzy. We drove around Piedras Negras, getting a few more things for the road, except for the initial shock and anxiety of seeing so many sophisticated, idle young men conspicuously posted outside prominent buildings or lounging on stone benches in the plaza. We felt confident enough to go about our business, although we did our best to make it fast. We didn't want to call attention to ourselves in case they were members of any of the border gangs who had been abducting people along the frontera, the border between Mexico and the U.S. I bought a huge bag of tortilla chips, some peanuts, and some water bottles from a street vendor. Velia and Delia purchased piping hot ears of corn on a stick, wrapped in their own leaves and enveloped in newspapers to keep them warm. Juanita bought some raspas, icy fruit-flavored treats to cool us down. I drove with one hand while I ate mine before it melted. This time, the girls were right. Getting through the checkpoint outside Piedras Negras on Highway 57 was easier than getting past the old officer at the aduana. The guard at the depot didn't ask where we were going or what we were doing in Mexico. We gave him the same story about our grandmother, but he seemed uninterested. Actually, the officer, a young skinny guy in his early 20s, was more about making a buck than doing his job. When he asked us for our travel permit, he rubbed his fingers together and rested his right hand inside the door as he looked away toward the road behind us. Velia, Juanita, and I looked at his hand dumbly. Ahem. Delia cleared her throat. We turned to look at her. The dead man's hand was propped back on the headrest of my seat, holding a crisp, neatly folded $20 bill between the index and middle fingers. The permit is in the glove box, remember? She continued, arching an eyebrow to emphasize her point. Oh! Juanita's eyes sparkled with understanding. Then she searched the glove box and pulled out a piece of paper. She looked at it for a moment, then offered it to me. I stared at it dumbfounded. Velia took it, reached over me, and pressed the money and the paper into the man's hand, and I smiled at him. I'd seen Papa do this many times before, but it would have never dawned on me to try it. If it had been left up to me, we would have gotten hauled into a Mexican jail that day. The skinny officer took both items. He pretended to read the piece of paper as he discreetly stuffed the $20 into his cuff of his long-sleeved shirt. After a few seconds, he handed the permit back to me and waved us through. I handed the paper to Juanita and drove off. The whole incident took less than 2 minutes, but it was the longest, most stressful 2 minutes of my life. Ah, the power of moolah, Juanita said, resting back against her seat and laughing out loud as we drove off. I can't believe we pulled that off, I said, letting out a long-held breath. What was that? What did you show him? I don't know. An old receipt of some kind, Juanita said, looking at the piece of paper in her hand. Doesn't matter. It could have been my Christmas list for all he cared. After driving for hours in the hot morning sun without stopping past Nava, past Allende, past Nueva Rosita and Sabinas, we hit a long stretch of open road. The day was hot and sticky, and we were drenched down to our socks. The old Novus air conditioner had never worked, so our only source of comfort came from the open windows. At the first sight of civilization, we veered off the road and stopped at an old gas station just south of Monclova. Juanita went into the convenience store to pay for the gas. I kept an eye on her as she looked around for goodies to bring back to the car. The peanuts were running low, and the water and the chips were long gone. After I finished pumping the gas, I went in to hurry her along. I wanted to make sure we were on our way before our other travelers showed up and saw the dead man propped up against our back window. Let's go, I said, as she picked through the bottles of Mexican fruit pop in the beverage cooler. Papa is getting upset. Stop telling me what to do, Juanita ordered. Can't you see I'm busy here? Man, you made me lose count. 3, 4, 5. There, we can go now. I picked up a pineapple soft drink. 6, I said, handing it to her. No, she insisted, putting the bottle back in the open cooler. We don't need so many. There's only 5 of us. No, I corrected her. There are 6 of us. Juanita lashed out at me. You always do this, Odelia. You always think you know what you're talking about, but you don't. You're just a big fat bully who doesn't know anything. Count 'em. Cinco hermanitos. 5. There are 5 of us. Don't forget Papa, I said, nodding to the shop owner and his wife staring at us from the counter. Oh, Juanita said, her ego deflated like a tire. I forgot about Papa. He's probably dying of thirst. Here, let's take 2 for him, she said, picking up a 7th soft drink. Whatever, I said, walking away. Let's go. You're making us late. When we got back to the car, Velia and had Peta in a fierce headlock. Our baby sister was squealing like a piglet, but Velia had her hands around Peta's mouth to keep her from crying out loud. What's going on in here? I asked, hauling the door open and jumping in the front seat. Peta was crying silently, her body shaking. Little Miss Tattletale here was going to call Mama, Delia hissed through clenched teeth. She had a handful of change and she was trying to leave the car. She said she was tired and hungry and she was going home. Start the car, Juanita demanded, dumping out the sodas on the floorboard and jumping in the front seat. Hurry, they're looking at us. Let's get out of here before these 2 get us in trouble. I didn't have to ask who was looking at us. The middle-aged woman and her husband were peering out the shop window, watching us. Juanita reached down for the 2 sodas. She handed one to Delia, and they made a show of opening them as we pulled out of the gas station. Delia put on a bright, happy smile on her face and waved goodbye to the couple as Juanita guzzled down her soda enthusiastically. Chiflada, Delia hissed, letting go of Peta and pushing her aside. Guys, you've got to stop tormenting each other, I said as I made our way down the highway. We're about to hit Castaños, and I want us to stop and eat a real meal. But not if you're going to act like this. I can't have you turn on us, Peta. We're in this together, remember. And Velia, you can't treat her like she's an animal. It's her fault, Velia sputtered, her hazel eyes burning with resentment. She bit me, the little mongrel. What? I asked. I tried to keep her in the car, but she bit me. See? My arm is still bleeding. Velia held out her slim arm, and I assessed the damage. At the sight of purple teeth marks on Velia's forearm, I lost it. That's it, I said. We're not stopping at Castaños. We're driving straight through. We'll stop to rest in the woods. You guys are just going to have to wait for me a while I go back and get us some real food from the restaurant. It's a shame, too, because takeout food doesn't taste nearly as good as when it's served warm. You're just going to have to eat your tacos all cold and stiff. I don't care, Peta kicked the back seat. You can keep your stupid tacos. The first chance I get, I'm telling. I'm being kidnapped. Juanita's head turned back faster than you can spin a top. Kidnapped? You heard me. I'm turning you in, Peta insisted, crossing her arms. Tears were rolling down her face. Her eyes were red, orbs of anger, and she wasn't making so much as a whimper, which was unusual for her. She usually wails louder than a smoke alarm. I told you we should have left her behind, Delia told Velia. Yeah, then she would have told Mama where we were going, and they would have found us by now. True, Delia whispered as she turned to face forward. For the rest of the ride, we all ignored our disloyal little sister. Peta, her face scrunched, cried that she was hungry, so I assured her we would be stopping soon. After we passed Castaños, I took the nearest county road to the left and drove into the woods. We found a small clearing where we all got out to stretch our legs and catch our breath. We'd been on the road for at least 4 hours, and my body felt numb. None of us were used to sitting around too long. I'm going back into town, I said after a while, and nobody complained. Juanita, Delia, and Velia unpacked some of the blankets and backpacks from the trunk. I left them there, resting sedately under the shade of the tall ash tree, far off into the woods, out of sight of anyone driving by. Castaños was small, deserted. I noticed that on the way through, which made it a perfect place to stop. The less people saw of us, the better. The only street vendor I found was stationed at the edge of town. I got out of the car and bought some tacos and more sodas to go. The vendor pretended that he couldn't break the $20 I handed him, so I made him give me the change in sodas. and act like he did not like, but I didn't have time to make change anywhere else, and I was not going to tip him $10. I was in a hurry to get back to the girls. As I drove out of town, I saw an ancient woman standing in a blighted field. She stood watching me, her long gray hair caught in the wind like wisps of silver thread. I couldn't see the details of her long tunic dress from the distance, but I could tell it was old and gray. "Lorona?" I whispered, slowing down to get a better look, but as I did, the mysterious woman turned away from me. I watched the road ahead for a good place to turn around, but when I looked back, the woman was gone. Disappeared, like she'd never been there. As I sped away, I had a suspicious feeling that I was needed back at our secluded rest stop, and I was right. As I drove off the road and up to our hiding place, I saw that Delia and Velia were lounging together under the tree. They looked like bookends, sitting right up against Peta, who was tied and gagged between them like a giant tamal, rolled up in her own blanket. "What in the world?" I asked as I stumbled up the hill toward them. "She tried to run away," Juanita explained. "We had to run after her, knock her down, and drag her back. She did it again and again, 100 times. It was getting ridiculous." I handed Juanita the plates of food and shoved Delia away from Peta. "More ridiculous than this?" I asked, staring at them in disgust. If we hadn't been two-thirds of the way to El Sacrificio already, I would have shoved them all back in the car and taken them back home. "They had no other choice," Juanita whispered, defending her sisters. "She's crazy." Velia pushed Peta toward me and got up to stretch her long, coltish legs. "Yeah, her brain is fried." Delia joined her twin to shake her legs out and kicked at Peta in the process. "She's got mad cow disease." "Don't kick her." I knelt down and removed Peta's gag. "How could you do this to your own sister? This trip is supposed to help us get closer. We have to stick together. Be nicer to each other from now on." Peta squirmed miserably beside me like a cocoon butterfly trying to break free. "My arms are asleep." "What makes you so righteous all of a sudden, Miss Know-it-all?" Velia taunted. I ignored Velia's comment and started to undo the knots that held the blanket around Peta's body. "Get away from her. What's the matter with you? She's not a goat. She's a human being, a child who's obviously afraid." "She's a narc," Delia started. "She won't stop trying to turn us in." "Are you okay?" I asked Peta as I removed the blanket and freed her completely. She nodded and threw herself into my arms, bawling. "I'm not a narc," she wailed, clutching at my shoulder. "I just want to go home. I miss Mama. I miss our Loteria games. I miss the Mariposas." "I know," I whispered, holding her tightly. "I know. Mamita, I know. But we're almost there, and after we deliver this man to his family, we can all go home. I promise. You'll get to sleep in your own bed tomorrow night. Can you just hang on for a few more hours? Maybe?" "Yes," she whispered, worn out from her tearful release. "I think I can." "Good." I kissed her forehead. "Are you hungry? I brought you some of those baby taquitos. The little red ones you like, with guacamole. You want some?" She shook her head and buried her face in my shoulder. "No." "You tired?" I asked her, feeling my heart twisting painfully within my chest. "You want to take a nap?" "Yes," she whispered, snuggling her face into my neck. I fluffed a couple of pillows and laid them down for us. "Well, why don't you lie down here with me and rest?" I invited. Peta lay down and I put my arm right around her. Delia and Velia snorted in disgust. They turned their backs to us and opened up the containers of food. They started to eat the tacos. After they'd had their share of the food, they slid a tray over to our end of the blanket, their faces contrite. It was their way. They were often hot-headed, but also fast to regret their harsh words. This was their peace offering of sorts. Juanita and I coaxed Peta to eat before taking a nap, which she finally did with delight. After we ate, we all lay back down in the blankets and waited for the afternoon sun to burn itself down. When we were awakened at dusk, we were covered in mariposas. The snout-nosed butterflies were everywhere, flittering in the air, resting on our bedclothes, even tangled in our hair. "They found us!" Peta shouted, jumping up and spinning around on the blankets like a ballerina. "I love you! I love you!" she kept chanting to the butterflies. The mariposas swirled and twirled around us like snowflakes in the surreal light of dusk, making the moment almost magical in its beauty. Little by little, the butterflies drifted away. Onward and forward they went, moving toward their car, with Peta dancing in the midst. I looked at the sun looming low in the horizon. I think it's time we move on. It's about to get dark, and I don't want to see what kind of wild beasts roam these woods after dark. I think you're right, Juanita agreed. She got up, and together we shook out the blankets and rolled them tight. Velia and Delia packed up our gear, and we headed out again. We left the afternoon shenanigans far behind us as we drove farther and farther away from home. Our more sisterly mood had returned, at least for now. What do you think his wife will say when she sees him? Juanita asked in the darkness of the car. We had been driving for almost an hour under the blanket of night, and by our calculations, we were about to hit El Sacrificio within the next few miles. I don't know, I said, but it's too late to turn back now. Besides, I think we're doing the right thing. Juanita reached over and patted me on the shoulder. We're doing more than the right thing, she said. We're doing something honorable here. We're making sure this man receives what's coming to him. And what's that? Velia asked. A proper funeral, of course, Juanita informed her. Being laid to rest in his own hometown, surrounded by his family and friends. Everyone deserves that. This is an admirable thing we were doing. They'll thank us for this. His wife and his family will be eternally grateful to us. We might even end up in the news after all. But in an even greater light, we'll be heroes, heroines, I corrected proudly. In the news? Here, Delia asked. Are we ready for it? Well, at least we're better dressed, Velia retorted from her seat in the back. I didn't know what I agreed with her. We'd been driving all day in the hot summer sun, and we hadn't bathed since before our swim yesterday. Delia squealed, as if the concept had finally sunk in and she couldn't believe it. We're going to be celebrities. We'll be in all the papers, Juanita chimed in, turning to look at the twins in the back seat. People will want our autographs. We'll be famous, Peta asked, her eyes full of wonder as if they were starting to wake up to the seriousness of our situation. There's nothing to be nervous about, Velia whispered. She wrapped her other arm around Peta's shoulders and pulled her in close for a hug. Being famous is like eating the best flan in the world. It's so good. You can never get enough of it. Trust me, you're going to love being in the spotlight. In celebration, Juanita turned on the radio. Our favorite songbird, Selena, was singing happily about something fun and exciting, a song about love at first sight. Bida bida bom bom, she sang. Bida bida bom bom. Her voice on the radio was so exhilarating, so full of life, that suddenly we were all singing. Our voices drowned out Selena's, but we didn't care. It wasn't about listening to her, it was about singing along with her, about being in the moment with her. For a brief and joyful instant, she brought us closer together and made us enjoy each other's company. She made us sisters again.